Is, you know. I don't want to have like stuff coming up my nose either. Are you a aficionado of the writer whose work I'm going to be exploring?
Yeah, I used to really be into them,
Really?
back in the day, and it's been many, many years. My son is actually just finishing up Moby Dick in his
Oh,
high school English class, and he's about to start Leaves of Grass.
oh,
So
that's
tonight he's gonna
wonderful.
come tonight. Wow, too much homework, Dad.
Well,
Very cool.
I was, that's where I first encountered that I remember Walt Whitman lines was in high school English class.
I'll top this off now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, like I say, I'm getting over a cold, but my voice is better now than it has been in days. Sometimes I have to talk, well, I usually talk outdoors, and I've been having not quite laryngitis. But I tested for COVID and it came back, negative. So that was a real relief because if, yes. So I'm a child of my times. So, yeah, but for Whitman, I'm so glad that people are still learning it in high school. I worry about literacy in our day. Of course, I guess we all do. It's a responsibility, yeah, to be concerned about the things that we are that we are concerned about. And so, if we're going to look at a thinker such as Walt Whitman, we have to. I must, from the get-go, to smooth my feathers back. I must reassure myself that actually the ultimate creative expression of Walt Whitman, from Walt Whitman's soul to our soul, is essentially a very simple thing. It's an energy actually. It's like it's a transmission of a certain kind of like spiritual appreciation of beauty kind of energy, but it carries with it like a river, like a rivulet. Um, and always our speech is always sprinkled with things that we've gleaned from reading Whitman, such as words like rivulet. I cannot. Uh, so many words, the way that he's used them, have been. Our speaking tongues have inherited that with our culture in what we hear with our ears and see with our eyes when we read. And so, so Whitman's gift then, you know, dazzling and tremendous, how quick the sunrise would kill me. If not now and always, I could get the sunrise out of me. That's one of my favorite lines from Leaves of Grass. But in this sense, that's what we are talking about. We're talking about an energy that is conveyed through the medium of the living word. The living word, aware of the life giving energies that give it meaning. And something in our own minds is awakened. And this is the feeling that we get, of sudden growth or enhancement of consciousness when we read something and realize, this is a human being thinking. This is warm with thought, and we've come to define thought in many ways. But democratic vistas, the way that vistas is carrying Whitman's energetic meaning is that these are inklings. Inklings, I'm not sure if he uses that word as much. He's a Quaker. Remember, his forebears were Quaker. So that there is already a tradition of hearkening to one's own inner voice, in the living word. This was from their understanding of the religious truths of the Bible. This was the conveyances that literature was carrying, and Whitman imbibed it from the beginning. So we speak of inklings, we speak of, yes, inspirations, intuitions. He's the intuitive thinker, self-taught par excellence, that we will ever run across. And always there will be new ways to understand what Whitman has expressed. But as I was saying, vistas. So the essays, the memoranda, the jottings, the gatherings, the gleanings. It's a piecework. He's a tailor as a prose artist. Whitman is very much of a tailor. He's a journeyman. He's putting things together, oftentimes while he's moving from place to place. This is such an ideal. And it's and maybe we'll touch on that again too. The inklings, they come and they go. But the vistas are visions. The democratic vistas is a prose work and the strophic poetic unit is the paragraph. And they bring us closer to Whitman's spoken voice. They bring us closer to Whitman's kind of like thought rhythms when he's not, possessed by the higher Vatic spirits, which give us the masterworks of poetics, of poetic literature, of poems. Those are more structured pieces. His prose comes out of a more worksmanship kind of spirit. And the same inspirations are there that give it this vast sweep. It's mystical writing. Vistas, they are visions, conceptual visions, intuitions that are not thought out by reason, but arrive in one's rhetorical imagination. So here's a paragraph from that with one of the words we'll be looking at. Quoting from Whitman's Democratic Vistas, "We have frequently printed the word democracy. Yet I cannot too often repeat that it is a word the real gist of which still sleeps, quite unawakened, notwithstanding the resonance and the many angry tempests out of which its syllables have come from pen or tongue. It is a great word whose history, I suppose, remains unwritten because that history has yet to be enacted. It is, in some sort, younger brother of another great and often used word, nature, whose history also waits unwritten. As I perceive the tendencies of our day in the States, and I entirely respect them, are toward those vast and sweeping movements, influences, moral and physical, of humanity, now and always current over the planet, on the scale of the impulses of the elements, then it is also good to reduce the whole matter to the consideration of a single self, a man, a woman, on permanent grounds, even for the treatment of the universal in politics, metaphysics, or anything. Sooner or later we come down to one single solitary soul. Democracy. And out of democracy, the forebearer of democracy, as Whitman brings it in, is nature. Nature now. But both of these words, and this is another thing about Whitman that's also maddening, he's a generalist. These are generalizations. These concepts, these are mythical concepts. These are rational contexts, rational concepts borrowed from the world of rationality. They're commonly used words: democracy, reason, nature, all of these things. But Whitman is charging them with the inspiration that he sees in them in order to make this utterance, in which there is a world, in which Whitman offers to us his lived example as an interpreter of the meaning of words like democracy and words like nature. And so this is what must be said then. He's a generalist. He's scintillating. Every sentence is like a wave of the ocean. And when you look at the waves of the ocean coming in and out with the sun at your back, you see the sand grains sparkle. And they sparkle in different patterns every time. And one wave comes one way and another wave comes another way. And they are incessant, but the pattern that they follow, though regular, is at the same time unpredictable. This is the consciousness in which Whitman's pulsating creations live and move and have their being. You see, this is how it is. And so it's, for me, it's challenging and it's difficult to tune in enough to be able to talk about, what I see in it and what I like about it. But so a world is made. And what are the yins and the yangs in Whitman's pattern of being? And ever more he is humble to us and common to us because, like us, Whitman is a seeker of the whole. and he's living and moving in humble realms. Why? Because he is a citizen of this democracy, you see, and as such, and as he declares by fiat, I celebrate myself, I sing myself, what I shall assume, you shall assume, for everything belonging to me as like belongs to you. You see, it is this awakening in him has its patterns in the things that he sees in nature. And there we are again, back to the word nature, which is the forebearer of democracy. For him, nature utters, nature speaks. For him, for Whitman, nature speaks in these elemental spiritual concepts. But he's an empiricist, I have to say also, because he walks the streets. He lives in a democracy. He moves in the ensemble. He moves among the people. He appreciates them. He sympathizes with them. He has a temperament. There was a child that went forth every day, and everything that child saw or touched became part of that child. There was a child went forth, and everything that he saw, became a part of him. And then Whitman will catalog it and write about it more. And he doesn't mind if people say, "Oh, you do go on about things, don't you?" Because he's a god. I mean, he's inspired by a Vatic tongue, a prophetic personality. But when I say God, then I want to remind you, Whitman opens the doors in a natural way to all of the different world religions, the old ones, the contemporary ones, and the ones yet to come. And he shows the way into them and seeing their essence and understanding, and he speaks back to them. He dialogues with them out of his mythical, timeless self. So, the macrocosm, is the macrocosm in Whitman's mind is the containment of the macrocosm within the microcosm. But so there. But what about self and society? That's another yin and yang. For Whitman, the path of life is a holy road. The path of life is a holy road and an open road, and all are invited. And this ship takes whores and gamblers. This ship takes winners and losers. Ain't no fair. On this trip, you ride for free. Or do you? So there's that aspect of things. Sometimes I want to speak of amor fati. We touch upon it. There's the inspiration of that, such an inspired generalist who can actually, just expostulate up a storm in such a stylistic way, such an artless way, and which creates its own style of profusion, right? Scintillating and profuse are all these aspects of Whitman that make him challenging, right? And then there's the shuffle and the blab and the hurly-burly of the places and the common voices that he hears and the common things. And among the common things is every particle of common being that we hold contains its contradiction. In turn, it contains its yin and its yang. And there are the inspirations, and there are the secrets, and there are the mysteries, and there are the forbidden things. All these I bring into the themes of the poems, you see, and I'm writing them to you. He's writing them to his reader, who is us, but we feel him in our solitary selves. And so in that way, that's the other aspect of the Vatic kind of religious aspect of Whitman. To really understand him is to be brought into a confidence of minds thinking alike in a chain down through time and space. And this is rich. This is a rich inheritance. But it has its drama, and our brother Walt is he's a dramatist. He's, a con artist in the name of holy truth. He assimilates all these things. The child that goes forth to become everything in Walt Whitman becomes the man, the journeyman who sees the hubbub and the blab and the gab and the loitering and has some unspeakable impulse to sound his own barbaric yop over the rooftops of the world, and then be a witness to the tumultuousness of the times and the pain, and come to awaken to all the things that his fiery feet have left behind when he was plucked by the scruff of the neck and carried to the top of the heights of poetry, and uttered the song of the word in mass, and looked out over the entire land, and in a jubilant voice sang of its multitudinousness. But there's the pathos of the forbidden, the pathos of the solitary vision. He knows it's his alone, and it's his communion with the page. And he knows that the ones that he communes with the most he never sees. And then we discover, yes, that's because that's us. And so we feel his spirit again, And anyway, so this is, okay, here's what I'll say. I'm going to try to talk in a little bit less abstract terms and begin to bring in some actual natural substances and things, which will again then become metaphors. The calamus. Let me mention the calamus. It is a plant. It is a swamp plant that grows by the edges of rivers and streams. And it's a tuber, and it's fibrous. It has a fibrous stalk, and it's rich with a certain kind of sap from which are distilled perfumes and essences. And yes, candy, and yes, medicine, and yes, poison, all of these things it can be the calamus plant. For Whitman, it is that, and it is also so much more, and maybe we'll talk about that. But so from the calamus poems, let us draw this notion of a symbol, the calamus, the plant, the living thing, but in the spirit of the natural visionary scientist. We see that this green, vitreous thing within its structure, and what gives it life, gives it this energy that makes it seek toward the light. And it's 1,000 complex life forms are engendered in it and in our minds when we study it. And our eyes begin to open, and we see more and more of the world. And for some, the things of the world, as their meaning expands, begin to give forth a voice. And Whitman takes that down. But in any way, he's also a dramatist, as I've said, and a bit of a con man, and because he wants to get your attention. And he says, to me, whoever you are holding me now in hand, whoever you are holding me now in hand, without one thing all will be useless. I give you fair warning before you attempt me further. I am not what you supposed, but far different. Who is he that would become my follower? Who would sign himself a candidate for my affections? The way is suspicious, the result uncertain, perhaps destructive. You would have to give up all else. I alone would expect to be your sole and exclusive standard. Your novitiate would even then be long and exhausting. The whole past theory of your life and all conformity to the lives around you would have to be abandoned. Therefore, release me now, before troubling yourself any further. Let go your hand from my shoulders, put me down, and depart on your way. Or else by stealth in some wood for trial, or back of a rock in the open air. For in any roofed room of a house I emerge not, nor in company. And in libraries I lie as one dumb, a gawk, or unborn, or dead. But now just possibly with you on a high hill, first watching lest any person for miles around approach unawares, or possibly with you sailing at sea, or on the beach of the sea, or some quiet island. Here, to put your lips upon mine, I permit you, with the comrade's long-dwelling kiss or the new husband's kiss, for I am the new husband and I am the comrade. Or if you will, thrusting me beneath your clothing, where you feel the throbs of your heart, or rest upon your hip, carry me when you go forth over land or sea. For thus merely touching you is enough, is best, and this touching you I would silently sleep and be carried eternally. But these leaves, conning you, at peril, for these leaves and me you will not understand. They will elude you at first, and still more afterward. I will certainly elude you. Even while you think you had unquestionably caught me, behold, already you see I have escaped from you. For it is not for what I have put into it that I have written this book. No, nor is it by reading it you will acquire it. Nor do those who know me best, who admire me and vauntingly praise me, nor will the candidates for my love, unless at most a very few, prove victorious, nor will my poems do good only. They will do just as much evil, perhaps more, for all is useless without which you may guess at many times and not hit that which I hinted at. Therefore release me and depart on your way. Oh, and so, yes, we put the book down and we continue an act that has gone on down through the centuries. But he's talking about, I have to tell you, your novitiate would even then be long and exhausting. And the first time I read that, and it got to me, I thought, oh, but my novitiate is already long and exhausting. And I have to laugh because that was a long time ago. But this is how Whitman works. You see, he brings us into this world, this very living world. And so if we, accept this world on its terms, of this living word, made alive for us and exemplified in these various works of art, these literatures, these utterances, we step further then into that, and then we begin to come back to, nature, and then this most refined further utterance in the progression, this mythical progression from timelessness of ideas into time and space, you see. And then he comes to democracy again because of it is the gift, right? The gift of inspiration in the terms of the body politic. This is what democracy is, you see, more than any charter, more than any rule, more than any interpretation or law or system of laws, not in that way. No, because this is the law more fundamental. This is the livingness of inspiration is expressed in the particular terms of the body politic, so as to bring about a basic need of human nature, this search and adherence to as an ideal, the hope for further good fortune, hope for providence to provide all we need materially and immaterially as well. And for this we are bound together in a common interest. And a common interest, that word has gone economic on us. But if we say in a common understanding, that word might belong closer to us, and then we might begin to understand a little bit of the richness inside of Whitman's thought of democracy, you see. And so we can feel it, happening in all these different ways, and we can look behind the manifold nature of appearances. I don't need to get too caught up in that, except to say that Whitman had a gimlet eye, is that how you say it? Had a sharp eye and a shrewd eye for a diagnostic eye for the corruption that filled his times. Let's give you an example of that, because also the prophets like Jeremiah will speak in these ways to give us an idea of invective. It's a certain style. It can be, we can come to understand it. It's actually a literary form. Once we understand notions of invective, I believe that helps us in our understanding, of the awareness of like the energies of anger and rejection and dismissal and contempt, what these things are is if they pass through too many doors unobserved, by minds unexamined, then we have problems in the world, as you might guess. But once we come to understand that there are so many ways to look out at the world and utter one's most private thoughts in the context of society and see where it fits and where it does not fit, and to know at times when it is to refuse to blend the everlasting no, and yet become aware of the possibility and the obligation to blend on a higher level, with the desire energy of the people. Because, it's an individual thing. The individual, by his very nature, is set apart from the crowd and knows things other people do not know. And a million things ensue from that. Whitman offers us a way to deal with the energies of such strange inklings about oneself, because he's a seer. And a seer is part of what the human race has as kind of like as a vocation or as a way to be. And the language of the culture is loaned to them in a way so that they can kind of like blend with it in such a way to bring an awareness into the language that the language itself will be able to carry again and be used poetically again and again. This is the way that these kinds of writings contribute to the culture. Okay? I've gone on for several parts now. But I'll just say this before I go into something else really quickly. Actually, let me set this aside for a moment and tell you. I mentioned Whitman as a tailor, sewing together ideas. It was a very rich time intellectually, in culture, and for a great many reasons, one could create one's own invectives on why that kind of richness isn't so much in the culture now. And of course, but Whitman could tell you, he could equal you lamentation for lamentation in his times. Believe you me, and then that gives us an idea that, yes, problems exist, They are there for us to resolve or see or live with or whatever. Whitman was a tailor. Whitman sewed things together. A tailor makes patches. A tailor puts together what has been rent and torn. When we step into the living form, when we go away from the static forms made of material things like cloth or clothes, and we go into the living form when we look at what is clothed. It's like looking from appearances to realities, looking from the clothed to the naked form and seeing the innate essence of the human being, and seeing the place where the innate essence of the human being is so damaged and torn, and being able to respond as if one was meant to respond that way. That's what Whitman did in the Civil War. He was a tailor of words and ideas, but he was a bandager of wounds and a patcher of a different kind of harm in the body politic, as exemplified in the living form of a human being, of a wounded soldier. Whitman is the prototype of the male mother, the servant of healing in and of itself. You see, and when he begins to do this kind of thing, he touches on this other and deeper and more richer kind of notion of cultural transmission, a different kind of archetype. It's like you see the connection between the poet and the medicine man of the language, but then there's the healer. But the healer is not like some superheroic god in a mythological comic book or something. No, the healer is a humble walker of the wards, you see, ministering to those who are themselves healers and sufferers of the ultimate wound in the body politic, which is war, you see. And Whitman learned to move in such a world and contribute something meaningful from his own being, you see. And this too opened the door further into this other kind of like section of democracy, right? I may go fishing for the passage, or I may not. But somewhere in there, Whitman talks about the sections of democracy. He speaks of there's political democracy, and then there are sections, other sections of democracy that open up as democracy progresses. You see, so he's continually looking at the spiritual side of democracy and finding so much to talk about and still carry, because then, the language becomes nuanced enough to bear the weight of these really seemingly subtle intuitions, which is why, which gives it its unique flavor and its unique importance, and is a certain kind of antidote. Yes, of course. We know this. Literature is a certain kind of antidote to the other forms of media saturation. And we see the overwhelming of it in our times, in a certain sense, more than Whitman had in his times. We do not have, Whitman did not have, well, he saw and realized the possibility in machinery, the exteriorization of consciousness. He saw this. And I'm sure that, the whole notion, I think the computer is actually more than anything. It's a digital device. And if Whitman were alive today and he was a super refined stylist, he would say this whole obsession with digits and the number 10 that gave the Romans their administrative, know-how, but it has so become such a dominating force in the further history of economic thought, if nothing else, if not scientific thought, why it's become this devourer, so that we submit our finest, our greatest pride in these mechanisms that do nothing more than illustrate the workings and what is possible in the mechanistic world. We see material exteriorizations of our faculty of vision. What is more of that than the concept of artificial intelligence? And should we say, would Whitman say to us, oh, against artificial intelligence, you place natural intelligence as if to overcome one with the other? Well, only in a satirical comic book would you do something like this. For Whitman, it's something else, because when he's talking about social conflicts of any kind, he is coming at it from the notion of a healer who knows the sufferings that those kind of conflicts can lead to through unenlightened minds, and therefore he's going to put a great emphasis, upon what is true and good and just. So the war itself, let's go into that just a little bit. Another aspect of Whitman, I think, if you can bear with me for just a moment, one of the great works of literature were these transcriptions, the great works of American literature by a socialist, a Jewish socialist, a German immigrant named Horace Traubel, Traubel, Horace Traubel, who knew Whitman for years, from the time of his when he was a teenager, and later grew to be a journalist, an activist, a theorist of American socialism. Was mentioned by Emma Goldman and by Helen Keller and by Eugene Debs, whose writings are still out there in the contemporary journalism of his day. And he did publish some poems, prose poems, Chance Democratic. No, it was Chance, something to do with Chance of Solidarity or something like that. Because it was that feeling, that give me you're tired, you're poor. And Whitman's inclusiveness, I think, fed into Horace Traubel's further understanding of that socialist ideal. And because Whitman's concept of it was seeded with such real truth, through his experiences in the Civil War, and then before that, of course, and on into the rest of his creative life, which was his whole life, of course. that Trobel was fed by that in his understanding of a certain notion of inclusivity and a certain aspect of the democratic spirit, which is like expansive and open and grandly breathes in, and then grandly bestows. And that is like its rhythm, of ultimate being. And it is a thing to be hoped for. It is a thing to be worked toward in these kind of like idealisms, you see. And so Horace Trobel took down a great deal of Whitman's speech. A recent compilation of this was put out by the great Library of America series. And it's a small selection arranged under headings and subjects of Horace Trobel's amanuensis, if I'm pronouncing it right, of Whitman in transcribing his speech. But now, I want to go back to democratic vistas. Here's a further vista then. So, creating space and light. Already you see how it can happen. But now he wants to describe a certain kind of essential quality. I mentioned he was fed by the Quaker tradition, which is a unique tradition in the literature of inspired Christianity. I want to say, of course, that he was self-schooled in transcendentalist ideology. And when I say ideology, I'm joking. It was the Puritan, the Unitarian, this distinctly critical-eyed acumen, which in some level I think fed by Goethe and by the German idealists. So that Ralph Waldo Emerson and others, they read Plato, they read Fichte, they read Goethe, and that Goethe opens the door to the Eastern mystics, and Thomas Taylor, the British independent translator of Plato, who knew Coleridge, and Coleridge too had his amanuenses over there on the other side. And I also want to mention Thomas Carlyle. There's a certain ilk, of thinking composition that you can point to sometimes, and it's another one of the vistas, literarily, of trying to understand Whitman's gift, the phenomena of Whitman's work. But he's good. But moral conscientiousness, crystalline, without flaw, not godlike only, entirely human, awes and enchants forever. Great is emotional love, even in the order of the rational universe. But if we must make gradations, I am clear there is something greater. Power, love, veneration, products, genius, aesthetics, tried by subtlest comparisons, analysis, and in serenest moods, somewhere fail, somehow become vain. Then noiseless, with flowing steps, the Lord, the Son, the last ideal comes. By the names right, justice, truth, we suggest, but do not describe it. To the world of people, it remains a dream, an idea, as they call it. But no dream is it to the wise, but the proudest, almost only solid, lasting thing of all. Its analogy in the material universe is what holds together this world, and every object upon it, and carries its dynamics on forever sure and safe. Its lack and the persistent shirking of it, as in life, sociology, literature, politics, business, and even sermonizing, these times, or any times, still leaves the abysm, the mortal flaw and smutch, mocking civilization today, and all its unquestioned triumphs, and all the civilization so far known. And isn't that very much like what Jeremiah, Ezekiel, or Isaiah write, in a certain sense? The language of indictment, the language of looking out and seeing that the society does not have in it what you're looking for in terms of what can bring about its fulfillment, and it's up to you to be able to say it. It has to be from human consciousness come the seed ideas, where they always are, And when we come to be aware of the seed ideas, it's like, of course, it is original in and of itself in that way, and in that way only is its originality ours, right? You might say. And it gives you an ability then to step farther without it going to your head. And if it goes to your head, it's just like so much loose electricity. And this is another sense in Whitman also, to me, is what Allen Ginsberg calls him, a courage teacher, because his spirit is a gathering sort of spirit. It teaches how to gather by seeing the value of the things that you see and understanding your own likeness inwardly to what those values are, so establishing an awareness of the resonations between you and them. And it is this living kind of energy, electricity, this is what democracy is made. And in our further understandings of it, it will be easy for us to see when that power is being used for egotistical purposes, and being simply to understand, yes, that is there too, But then Whitman speaks of an actual living energy of right, justice, or the good. And he speaks of it in these terms that make it possible to be considered kind of like a part of like comparative politics. There are those who say that democratic vistas is an early example of comparative politics, and that's okay. I'm sure that I used to have an eye for it. I used to be able to pick it up right away. The British journalists, British writers, Hugh Lanson Fawcett, Havelock Ellis, Somerset Maugham, Christmas Humphreys. Some of these people inspired Thomas Merton. Some of them inspired Alan Watts, a certain kind of like journeyman prose writer. And they in turn, it was like Emerson. You see, it was in a certain sense, I want to tell you, Emerson is a bit of a pathfinder for this aspect of Whitman that we're exploring now. Whitman the sage, Whitman the visionary thinker, Whitman the prose workman, and also Whitman the teacher, Whitman the didact, and but in the simplest words. Oh yes, I have to mention Whitman is very simple. The hard part is there's just so many of him. That's the scintillating part. But like I say, it's actually simple as all wisdom of this sort is. Anyway, who could be considered a precursor of Whitman? Emerson. That's who. It's easy to think of. There's the aspect of Whitman, the Chivaic aspect. The iconoclast. And we have a habit of thinking, that Emerson was like the antithesis of that, the Boston Brahmin and all that stuff. And you can always say that it is true, but then let it run its course. Let such a thought run its course, and then you'll go back to attending to what constitutes, the writing, the musicianship of this classic kind of art form of philosophical essay, but homespun, not academic. This Emerson opens up the way. There were others before him. Starts out with the sermon, with the homily, with conversation in the village square. It was the method of Buddha. It was the method of Christ. It was the method of Epictetus. I don't know if Epictetus wrote or not. It was certainly the method of Socrates. All of that. We get the knowledge of the actual text of their words through their listeners. Which both mystifies it and enhances it in a certain sense. And Whitman is taking place fully in the context of this. His style is meant to lend itself to this. He somehow instinctively knows that. So therefore, looking at the history of poetry and looking at the history of a place and looking at the history of a municipality or something like that, and looking at the history of the poetry in which the idea of these places lives, you can look at Whitman as being like the father of legends, of numerous legends of poetic image and poetic imagery. And so as a dedication to Berkeley, as well as a certain particular Ginsbergian understanding of the gift of Walt Whitman in relation to the social body politic, I offer this poem written by Allen Ginsberg in about 1955. It is called A Supermarket in California, and he's going for a walk in Berkeley. He used to live right there in central Berkeley on Milvia Street. The housing there is no longer there now. It's other stuff is there, but the same sidewalks. Jack Spicer lived up the road. Philip K. Dick lived in other different places around. Anyways, this is this is Walt Whitman, or not. Well, this is Allen Ginsberg, but he's looking for Walt Whitman. A Supermarket in California. What thoughts I have of you tonight, Walt Whitman. For I walked down the side streets under the trees with a headache, self-conscious, looking at the full moon. In my hungry fatigue, shopping for images, I went into the neon fruit supermarket, dreaming of your enumerations. What peaches and what penumbras, whole families shopping at night, aisles full of husbands, wives, and the avocados, babies and the tomatoes, and you, Garcia Lorca, what were you doing down by the watermelons? I saw you, Walt Whitman, childless, lonely old grubber, poking among the meats in the refrigerator and eyeing the grocery boys. I heard you asking questions of each. Who killed the pork chops? What price bananas? Are you my angel? I wandered in and out of the brilliant stacks of cans, following you, and followed in my imagination by the store detective. We strode down the open corridors together in one solitary fancy, tasting artichokes, possessing every frozen delicacy, and never passing the cashier. Where are we going, Walt Whitman? The doors close in an hour. Which way does your beard point tonight? I touch your book and dream of our odyssey in the supermarket and feel absurd. Will we walk all night through solitary streets? The trees add shade to shade. Lights out in the houses. We'll both be lonely. Will we stroll dreaming of the lost America of love, past blue automobiles, in driveways, home to our silent cottage? Ah, dear father, graybeard, lonely old courage teacher, what America did you have when Chiron quit poling his ferry and you got out on a smoking bank and stood watching the boat disappear on the black waters of Lethe? It ends funny because he leaves Whitman standing on the edge in a classical Greek mythology scene of the underworld. What's up with that? Ginsberg teaches, and I attribute its teaching to Ginsberg. He points out, it's simple, really. It's a great literary contribution of Ginsberg. He points out, in simple terms, what is very true. The two polarities of Walt Whitman. On the one side, there is candor. That's a Ginsbergian word, candor. But I think that in the course of things, candor is understood by forthrightness. And that word is good. Forthrightness is good. It doesn't give the answers, but it's good to listen to it as a being, forthrightness, as a moral quality. Forthrightness on the one side, and according to Ginsberg's teaching about Whitman, on the other side, affection, love, forthrightness, and love. And the love is like the forthrightness. It's the same thing with democracy and insight. The forthrightness is the sunrise coming forth, and the love is what is revealed, and what is shown upon, you see. And so these are the two sides, of the kind of the Whitman poetic democratic tradition vision that Ginsberg also relates. On the one side, there is forthrightness, and on the other side, there is love, which brings me back to Calomel. I want to relate what Whitman saith about Calomel. This was taken down in his conversation at the table by his Amanuensis, Horace Trobel. And it's about Calamus, and Whitman was talking about Calamus as a living symbol, so to speak. And I believe it must be in a place where I can turn to and find it. If not, here it is, thank goodness. This is Whitman on Calamus, one of the meanings it has to him, after the fact. The Calamus poems were written after the Civil War, I believe, or they were published then, 1867 or so. And then further revisions came out. And then the first of the Democratic Vistas, the memoranda and notes that became Democratic Vistas, I think, have some connection, at least to my understanding, with about 1871 or something. I don't know. That aspect of things is interesting, but it must include the Civil War. Of course, the memory of it, the woundingness of it, his activities as a nurse there, but also the victory for the Union, which was also, it made sharper the hold of the mechanistic kind of world upon the life of America, because it was industrial strength what won that war. And when a country realizes what wins its wars, it builds up and sustains that thing in all these tremendous ways, and the Roman thing, the empire thing, gives us the great impetus. It is already there. Whereas others, see something different about all that, of course. But Whitman realized, he was looking at that kind of world, And so, yes, we mirror the times together, Walt Whitman and us. It's meant to be that way because he's got something to say to help just like we do, each one of us, when we understand. Anyway, so this is Whitman on Calamus, taken down from Whitman speaking at the table. Calamus is a Latin word, much used in Old English writing. I like it much. It is to me, for my intentions, indispensable. The sun revolves around it. It is a timber of the ship, not there alone in that one series of poems, but in all. He's saying this. It's not just the Calamus poems that Calamus is in, but in all of them. The sun shines. The sun revolves around it. He doesn't just say the sun shines upon it. The sun revolves around it. It is timber of the ship. Not there alone in that one series. He's talking about Calamus poems, but in all this writing, these speeches too, belonging to all. It is one of the United States. It is the quality which makes the states whole. It is the thin thread, but oh, the significant thread, by which the whole nation is held together, a chain of comrades. It could no more be dispensed with than the ship entire. You see, that thin thread, it's easy to say that it is, love or affection. We must understand it's agape. We must understand a great deal. Some of the stuff that I was reading in Whitman reminded me on the spot, St. Paul in Corinthians. This universal kind of like emotional feeling. Really, that's what it is. When to say love implies all notion of interpersonal dramas, and it's not that kind of thing necessarily. It is emotional awareness. It is an awareness of the heart. You see, it is from the mind, from thought, is insight. The sunrise we send out of us. But what it opens up, the world it opens up, that is the sunrise that meets us, and we see what our insight brings us, and it illuminates what we love, you see. And it is there as itself, but it is insight that lets us see that. So the intelligence contributes, and the heart, what? Verifies? Yes, verifies back to the insight. I'm not going to say to you that the head is more important than the heart, or the heart is more important than the head. No, I do not say that. But I will say that there is that in American writing given to us by Whitman, and it's part of all of us, that there is that kind of sense of given to us by very much a style of Quaker preaching, the awareness of the inner light. and the inkling, the openings, and we've got to pay attention to that sometimes if we wish. It's there for us. Whitman brings us that, I also want to remind you, calomel is what musical instruments are made of. The stalk is hollow. The sap is medicinal, good tasting and entrancing, they say, because it can be, we still aren't sure of all of the extent of its toxic properties. In Ayurvedic medicine, the calamus means vacha. The word is vacha, which is also, that vacha is speech, you see. And chamomile in Ayurvedic tradition, and we need understand it, not to apply it, but to just understand the nature of this is how thought can move in this way to create such an expression. It is said that the sore throat, a solution of chamomile is applied to soothe, the sore throat. But in soothing the sore throat, it's like ginger kind of. It soothes as well as it kind of gives of itself a little bit. There's something about it that is kind of like, psychoreactive is a crude medicinal kind of category. It's more like the inner transformation. It's an alchemy of things. And so, yes, in and of itself. And Whitman would be the first to say, every word is more of a poem than the words of any poem, And he would say something like that, I think it's true, definitely. Calamus is an example. Okay. Now, that being said, now I want to bring it all together then. Yes, I do, because I'll go on for like just 5-ish more minutes. And of course, we will see how necessary it is, to put the effort that, of watchful and attentive listening, if I can say that. I want to say, well, I was going to get to a quote of Whitman, but now I want to speak of reading comprehension. Okay? That's what I want to do. In the spirit of democracy and in the spirit of what helps democracy. Like I say, we can understand the living energy of words and feel their beauty and their power, but also be aware of, like all appearances, they have an innately mesmerizing quality. And if we judge merely by appearances, we can be fooled. So Whitman speaks of, he wants to give inspiration to the comprehenders. And it's in Democratic Vistas. He speaks of the people that he's speaking to, and he wants them to understand their role in society. So this is what I think I'll read this quote, and then I'll be able to let it all go, okay? But this is from Democratic Vistas. I copied it down in my notebook because I wanted to feel like what it was like to write it, with my hand. In the prophetic literature of these states, the reader of my speculations will miss their principal stress unless he allows well for the point that a new literature, perhaps a new metaphysics, certainly a new poetry, are to be, in my opinion, the only sure and worthy support and expression of the American democracy. The only sure supports and expressions of the American democracy. You see, the space is there for that kind of speech to have great meaning. And he's offering it to us, and it lives, and it is true. So let us continue to see what he says. Brother Walt, speak on. In the prophetic literature of these states, nature, true nature, and the true idea of nature, long absent, must, above all, become fully restored, enlarged, and must furnish all the pervading atmosphere to poems and the test of all high literary and aesthetic compositions. The whole orb, with its geologic history, the cosmos carrying a fire and snow that rolls through the illimitable areas, light as a feather, though weighing billions of tons. Furthermore, as what we now partially call nature is intended at most, as what we now partially call nature is intended at most only what is entertainable by the physical conscience, the sense
of matter and of good animal health, on these it must be distinctly accumulated, incorporated, that humans, comprehending these, has, in towering superaddition, the moral and the spiritual consciences, indicating his destination beyond the ostensible, beyond the mortal. You see, judge not by appearances. But he's talking about giving support to a whole language where we will understand the interstices of conventional thought, you see. And the language with which he chooses to do that is the language that brings into like nuanced detail our awareness and understanding of these emotional qualities that are moving through the body politic. And the language with which to express our own being in forthrightness as well as in love is to be found in the common mother tongue and the bond and the sanction of that. And democracy is one of the workings of that. The political democracy is only one section of that, and these other sections open out. And it is possible to speak this way because of our freedom as Americans. So God bless America. But you know how I got there in saying that. And for that, though, I have to thank you for your heroic listening, because as Whitman called forth generations of heroic readers and comprehenders, he knows they live, and they live in him. Anyway, I thank you for your heroic listening, and so long for now.